he's going to compliment you the entire time. He might be a little fresh.
The keystone in the arch of Star Wars.
But, you know, I'm not going to say no to George Lucas.
Right. Sorry, I'm getting like emotional.
And he's got this hulking, scary dude with the big nose and the perfect hair.
I understand. This is a safe space. This is a safe space between you and I and all of your viewers.
Cassian and Jim on the beach, and people are like, no. I can literally hear people out there, no.
Rogue One was awesome. I love the Han Solo movie, and then of course I love The Mandalorian.
And like getting to talk to fans face to face and learn their names and just, you know, get to hear their stories.
And the world of Star Wars, there's a bunch of people who look different, and there's different species. There's lizard men, there's psychic baby swamp monsters.
I joke that the best thing about writing Princess Leia is everybody knows who she is, and the worst thing about writing Princess Leia is everyone knows who she is.
And also you get Ewoks, and I am definitely a lover of Ewoks.
You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Yes, it's a good thing. It's a great thing.
Well, welcome to Around the Galaxy. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're joining us live, that means you're a patron, and thank you so much for doing that. If you're watching this later, make sure to check us out at atgcast.com, where you can find a link to join our Patreon, or, you know, just hang out with us, listen to some old episodes there, and keep up with the show, and check out our social media channels. You can find us on all social media channels at ATGcast. I have TikTok, guys. I have no idea what I'm doing. I have TikTok, but I'm not doing dances. I'm usually just putting clips from shows, but we're having fun on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, and of course Twitter, where I spend way too much time, all at ATGcast. Well, tonight I'm really excited to bring us a conversation with a gentleman named Stephen Kent, and Stephen is a communications and public relations professional. He lives outside the DC area, but he's also the host. He's a commentator on. You've seen him on CNN, you've seen him on Fox News, you've seen him on a bunch of different places, but he also has a podcast called Beltway Banthas, and it talks about Star Wars, and it puts a spin on our current political environment. It's a really interesting podcast. I definitely recommend that you check it out. He also has a book coming out in the very near future, which I'm going to let him tell us all about. But in the meantime, I am so excited to introduce Stephen Kent. Stephen, how are you?
I am very well, sir. Nice to be here.
Oh, it's so great to have you. I appreciate you joining us tonight. We're just, you know, it's interesting because you and I ended up just sort of connecting through a mutual podcast, and I was really excited to learn about your book. But for people who, obviously, I've done a little bit of research on you, but those who don't know you, maybe Stephen, give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah. So where to begin? I think right at the top of the background, you mentioned I've got a book coming out. So I'm the author of the forthcoming book, How the Force Can Fix the World, Lessons on Life, Liberty, and Happiness from a Galaxy Far, Far Away. As you mentioned, I am a career communications person and media guy. So I do political commentary. I am a talking head. I do shows, I do radio, and I talk about what's going on in the news, offer analysis from whatever point of view I land on. And then I also host a TV, YouTube show affiliated with Al Jazeera International, so news network. And I host one of their YouTube shows called Right Now with Stephen Kent. And that's what I've been doing the past couple of years.
Excellent. And it's great because there is, you know, so much conversation right now, just, you know, in general about Star Wars and sometimes politics. And was it really interesting? And I'll start it right here because I think it's really an interesting opportunity for us. Well, I was so excited to talk to you because I think when you introduce a combination of Star Wars and politics, immediately we live in a world right now, and I'd love your perspective on it because I've watched and read and heard it, and I enjoy your perspective on it. But we're in a world right now where you can't be Democrat or Republican, you're extreme right or extreme left, and that makes it really hard to have. Never mind a conversation about the world, but a conversation about Star Wars. Have you seen, or how are you viewing this unique world that we live in now, where if you and I were to just have a Star Wars conversation, sometimes we're pulled into a direction that's not just about the movies and the great stories that go with it.
Well, have you read the introduction to my book? That's one of the.
I'm setting you up, man.
Reasons,
I'm tossing them in. You're hitting them out.
Yeah, ding. One of the reasons that I started the Beltway Banthas podcast was because I detected two different things kind of in the market for podcasting and Star Wars fandom that were not being touched on. One, that I listen to a lot of political shows, and Star Wars naturally just comes up because when people are talking about right and wrong, good and evil, they're talking about their opponents on the other side of the aisle or at a different network, they say things like light side and dark side. They go like, oh, that person's just straight up Sith. The way people describe morality, describe good and bad, they often use Star Wars as a way to talk about it. People view the world through the lenses that Star Wars gave us, usually as children, right? Like it's just woven into who we are as people if you're a Star Wars fan. And I listen to a lot of Star Wars podcasts, and my perception of those are that if you talk about politics on a Star Wars podcast, you have to be very careful, very delicate, and you have to do it as little as possible. And that's actually for good reason, because when people are listening to Star Wars podcasts, they're listening to it because they want to talk about Star Wars, not be beat over the head with other things from outside of that. And so I wanted to do a show that safely, positively merged those two things together and created a space where talking about the politics of Star Wars, the way that it impacts your worldview, can be done in a way that is not meant to attack anybody, but just meant to help us understand one another better. Because the best conversations that I've had with people who don't agree with me about the way the world works, we can talk about Star Wars and figure out, what do we agree with about Star Wars, and where's the cognitive dissonance between that and the way that we see the world. That stuff's really interesting to me. So that's why I do this podcast, and I've been doing it for 4 years.
It's really interesting too, because I think there's this, I think people, you made a point. I was watching a clip that's on your website, and you made the point that people tend not to be comfortable talking, and maybe it was either in a clip or it was either in something I read on your website, but people tend to have this discomfort with talking about politics, who are a little bit more conservative. And I may be misquoting it, but whereas it seems like people who are a little bit more on the liberal side, and it's so funny because I'm even catching myself now as we're having the conversation, as you just said, it's difficult to put the label on without suddenly flying to an extreme and having to take a point of view. But you do bring up an interesting point, because I think when politics comes into the mix, whether you're talking about Star Wars or actual politics or any, holiday dinner conversation, it immediately puts people, and I think more so over the last several years, puts people in a crouch. And they're right. They're sort of put themselves in their fortress, and then you introduce something that should be something that we can sort of share. I mean, I've been a Star Wars fan since I was 7 years old. I was 7 when the first film came out, and it's always been a part of my life. I'd love to hear you sort of expand a little bit on what you're saying about how Star Wars is a good way to have that conversation, because it is the modern day myth. It's got those same elements that the stories of old used to have, right?
Yeah. Well, I just want to speak real quick to the earlier thing you're mentioning about like kind of who's comfortable talking about politics. I will put my cards on the table for you and for your listeners so that like we know what we're talking about here. I am a libertarian. I was a young man, like teenager. I was quite the neoconservative, and then I just was sort of a bland conservative guy through most of my 20s. And I found libertarianism around the time I turned 30. That's my politics, and that's the way that I look at the world. One of my observations about Star Wars fandom, which is one of the biggest fandoms in all of popular culture because it has been around so long. It spans so many multiple generations. We're going on 40 years now of Star Wars. Star Wars fan base is very big. And it goes without saying that because we are a center-right country, by and large, that polling consistently holds up. That even among like the Republican Democrat split, conservatives kind of take the majority of the pie in this country. That you're going to then have a huge chunk of Star Wars fans, by result, that are kind of conservative culturally. And one of the things that I always believed about my friends who come from that point of view is that they're very prickly about talking about politics and pop culture. They don't like the idea of anything that they enjoy in the commons, in the public sphere, popular culture as being political, because there is I think a sensibility in that world that it's all made by people who disagree with you. Therefore, it is being made to attack you. And that is taking over our culture right now. It's taking over fandom. I mean, you don't have to go any further than The Last Jedi discourse to understand that Star Wars is infected by the same sicknesses that are polluting other areas of our discourse. And I'm not saying Star Wars is causing the problem. I'm saying the problem is external, and it's finding its way into Star Wars just like it does everything else. Which is that we don't trust each other. We don't trust each other's intentions when we're talking about art. And I just have found consistently that Star Wars is still a positive medium to talk about these tough issues. But I don't want to monologue too long. I just wanted to speak to that.
No, I think that's
a difference.
No, I'm glad you clarified that, because I did a horrible job getting your thoughts out there. But I think it's an important point, and you bring up an interesting thing. And I know I'm sort of blown by my other question, but I want to hit on a really great point that you had there, is around this feeling that, because when I see the arguments, I want to get your thoughts on things like the fandom menace in a little bit, if we even want to go down that road. But you bring up an interesting point. I know who wants to go down that road, but I think it's part of the conversation.
The road is there. Yeah.
The road is there. So do you want to, yeah. But the interesting point you're making, that people feel like something is being put into, or they're receiving a message from, quote unquote, the other side in something they're comfortable with. Is that did I hear you right in putting it that way?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think Star Wars is in this space in our hearts and in our minds where it comes from a time in our life before we thought about things like the way the world works, before we thought about things like power and being powerless. We understand Star Wars on a very emotional and childlike level. But it's one of those things where it's like, as soon as you say like, oh, Star Wars is kind of political, you'll have some fans that go, no, stop politicizing Star Wars. And they'll immediately go, well, George Lucas made the movie about Vietnam. And, he was inspired by the stories of that time and the Nixon era. And to me personally, as someone who grew up hearing that a lot from like liberal friends who were kind of like trying to convince me that like I needed to change my opinion on the war in Iraq. Again, I was a kind of a bad neoconservative teenager, but I just remember it always being used as like, well, Star Wars says this about war and peace, therefore you should change your opinion. And I always would look at it and go, like, George Lucas gave a bunch of interviews, just like J.K. Rowling gives interviews about Harry Potter, and just sort of like adds more to it, is always adding more to like what was in the text. And I think that is something that always used to bother me, but that doesn't take away my right to say George Lucas made this thing, and no matter how many times he tells us it means this, I'm just not going to listen to him.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things where like the art always means something different to the artist than it does to the person who is consuming it. And I try to respect both. I try to respect like what was the artist saying and what were they inspired by versus what does it mean to me? And I think that those are just important, sacred questions that fans are uncomfortable talking to each other about. And that's just one of my missions as like doing the Beltway Banthas podcast, is just to like not judge anybody for like having their feathers ruffled or being uncomfortable talking about it. I just love Star Wars. I love the way that it makes me see the world. It makes me see fuller people I feel like I am able to be a more empathetic person, curious and interested in seeing the best in people who I have nothing in common with, because I was raised on Luke Skywalker looking at Darth Vader and saying, "You are my father, you are Anakin Skywalker." This thing that you're wearing on your face, this mask that you wear, not by choice, this is not you. And I can see more than that. I was raised on that, like almost like on a biblical level. And it's part of how I see the world. And it's like why I wrote this book, How the Force Can Fix the World. Cause like, I just feel like you don't need to sit down with Star Wars and hear George Lucas's opinions on neoliberalism and lobbying, which the prequels are absolutely about. Like, he's like venting in very plain sight about the impact of lobbying on politics in episodes 1, 2, and 3. But that's like so much less important than Star Wars Episode 1 being about how Padme's humility as a world leader and a queen, her ability to ask questions and kneel before the Gungans when she needed help, even though they hated her, and she doesn't trust them to kneel before them and say, "I need your help. I cannot do this." That's like the politics, in strong air quotes, that like that's changed the way that I see the world. And that's the stuff that matters. Like, that's the stuff that I care about.
Do you think it's possible to have these kind of conversations in the social media space? And the other thing that I'll add to that question is, because of the way I look at things, the way it strikes me every now and then, right? I mean, we both are active in social media. We both see all the drama and
the festivities.
That's a good. I'm going to start calling it the festivities. It feels much better. But we all see those things going on, and then you realize that it's a very small piece of the circles, the concentric circles of Star Wars fandom. So a one point of view on Kathleen Kennedy and Star Wars versus another point of view on the love affair between Kylo and Rey. It seems super important in that little tweet stream, but at the end of the day, are those conversations having bigger impacts on fandom and or politics broadly?
Well, all right. So they have an impact. I'm tempted to say two different things. Like the niche conversations that happen in the fandom, they set the tone of the discourse that all of the casual Star Wars fans who do not live and breathe the stuff, who don't have the toys and the helmets behind them, they're impacted by the conversations that we have, because the discourse going on within Star Wars fandom, whatever side of it that you are on, gets reported on by entertainment publications. And then the entertainment publications get reprints, and people do rewrites and other websites. Entertainment Weekly does a story about how fans are trolling this actress from Star Wars on Instagram, and then 3 other places republish the story. And then eventually, and this is kind of what always happens, Fox News eventually gets in on it, right? Like Fox News will run a story about how there's political controversy surrounding The Last Jedi. That was my first time on television in 2017, going on and doing a segment to explain why so many people on the internet were having political fights over The Last Jedi. That was my first time on TV, and it kind of opened up a new career path for me. But I get so bothered sometimes by what goes on in fandom, because it is like needing to remember that when you go and knock on somebody's door and ask them, I don't know, about like a political issue, like you're doing a door-to-door for a campaign, most people don't know who the vice president is. Most people are not following this crap show. They go to work, they raise kids, they have jobs, and they watch a movie on Netflix and go to bed. And that is their life. 4 out of 5 people, that is their life. And same thing with Star Wars. Like, while we're arguing and screaming about like whether or not there's proper representation in the ranks of the First Order, most people don't even understand what the First Order is.
Right.
The average Star Wars fan at the dog park that I meet thinks that the Empire are still the bad guys in episode 7, 8, and 9. Because Star Wars hasn't done a great job of explaining itself on like the way the galaxy is ordered.
Right.
So, you know, it's one of those things where like it's so niche what goes on in fandom, but it ripples outward. The more that our toxicity sort of creates news, it repels people. It makes people go like, well, I don't want to be part of that.
Right.
And I think it hurts us.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad to hear you say it that way, because there are times where I question myself as to why I get involved in conversations that are driven by the fandom menace type of thinking. And also, you know, in complete fairness, there's other extremes, but that's an extreme that has gotten a lot of noise, a lot of festivities associated with it. But the challenge that I have, and I would love your point of view on this, is I feel like a lot of those kind of perspectives and really playing in on trigger words, not in the classic sense, but trigger words like woke and SJW and phrases like that rile up people who are on the other side of that. To me, it's two things. It's creating a political swirl and driving a message, but at the same time, it's making a lot of those people a lot of money by driving clickbait. And that to me that's where I have the biggest problem with it. And I like your point of view about it's important because it does drive the discourse. My father called me one day. He said, "Hey, have you read this in Forbes magazine that they're redoing the sequel trilogy? And it's credited to a guy named Doomcock in a papier-mâché mask." So you are 100% right. It does have that additional swirl, but what about the toxicity for money-making perspective? Do you have a point of view on that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I have opinions about it. The conservative and liberal ecosystems are different sides of the same coin. It is trying to get people to be as whipped up as possible about those people. Both ecosystems fuel off of the same thing. And I spend more of my time, because I am a normal person and I sometimes lose control of my emotions, being frustrated by the establishment entertainment journalism industry, where they drive article after article after article about like right-wing fans, right? Like fanboys and stuff like that, saying mean things or being racist online, right? Like being nasty to people online about Star Wars and politics and harassing people. And these articles are always driven by like embedding 2 examples of a mean tweet. And then it gets republished. And then someone does the rewrite for it. And then before you know it, you've got this controversy because an anonymous person with an avatar for their photo on Twitter and a ridiculous name that is not, you don't even know if it's a real person, insulted somebody in the Star Wars fandom. And then it gets an article written about it because that person has a blog. And if that person has a blog and someone called them a nasty name, then their friends write blogs about it to defend them. And then you've just got this entire perception that there was like a massive problem when it was just like a couple of people, just a couple of people that you needed to block and you should block. I remember I went on Glenn Beck's radio show to talk about The Last Jedi and Russian trolls, because Russian troll farms did get involved in the discourse around The Last Jedi, just like they get involved in Pizzagate and Hillary Clinton stuff, and they get involved in the Black Panther discourse whenever that starts up. Like the job of people who mess with Americans and try to get them to rip each other's heads off is to put their thumb on little pressure points of things that are sacred. And nothing is more sacred than Star Wars. There were study after study done that was able to show that inauthentic accounts drive a ton of engagement on social media. And they do it in Star Wars just like they do everywhere else. Am I saying that all of it is done by bots in the middle of nowhere? No. There are some real people who do it. But we spend the majority of our time being upset about inauthentic, bad faith actors. And I just don't think we should. I don't think that articles should be written about mean people on Twitter unless you can verify who they are. Right. I think that should be like a rule. Personally.
But you also then have and you also have you do have the Geeks and Gamers and the Doomcocks and the
yes, I left out my criticism of them.
Yes. No, but I think so. That's I don't disagree. I think if you look at things objectively, surely there is absolutely influence and bots on every side, like you said, every side of every story, and because it is this opportunity to cause discourse and cause unrest. But then there's those that leverage it for an opportunity to, and this is my challenge because I've had people direct message me who are basically taking these talking points straight from Geeks and Gamers or these other places, and they're driving this message, and it's causing that discourse. So is there a responsibility? So to your point about you should have to identify if these people are real. You don't need to name names, right? I mean, that's journalism. You don't always have to name names, but you have to identify that your source is real. But is there something that should be taken into account for some of these YouTube channels that profit from this sort of negativity?
Well, I'm not sure that there's much to be done about YouTubers. I think I hold a little bit of a different standard for like when Vanity Fair or the EW is going to do a write-up on a story versus what Doomcock is going to rant about on Twitter. I'm sorry, on YouTube with a mask on, using just like bizarre video clips that he pieces together in front of a green screen. Right. Like, I don't think that there is anything to be done about anger culture when it comes to content creation. When it sort of veers off into entertainment journalism, I'm a little bit more, I don't know, I see like an actual ethical issue for an industry to deal with. My big frustration with the more like right-wing clickbait establishment for entertainment news is it's built on hating entertainment. Like all of these more reactionary conservative entertainment sites are founded on being angry about the thing that you say you love all the time. There's just, and I get like the negative polarization thing where it's like they're angry in defense of it because they love it so much. But it is just incredibly negative. And it is not a secret to anybody in the industry for media, whether it is print or it is video, that focusing on negative engagement and what you are against rather than what you are for is a major driver of traffic, and people have monetized it. I think the only thing, I'm a pretty rabid capitalist. The only thing that has ever made me doubt the idea of like capitalism and free market motives is what we're talking about here. Yeah. The idea that like the thing that is profitable is division. The thing that is profitable is us hating each other. And that for me, I'm like, there is no market solution because people like to have enemies. That's what people enjoy. Right. All of human history, we like to have enemies and others to point our fingers at. And I just keep looking at like cable news and then YouTube and then what I've talked about with entertainment mags, and I go, it's the market at work, and I hate it.
Yeah, and it's a challenge because it does put people. I worry about the people that it puts at risk, and I also think the other thing that's so interesting, and my first engagement with being attacked by trolls for a comment I made randomly 2 years ago, it put me in a really weird mental state for that day, and perhaps it happened to you the first time you were criticized openly and attacked. But luckily I'm not calling myself a Superman, but I have a strong enough, mental capacity. I'm Fortunately, I have a good emotional state to start in. But you can imagine, and the challenge is because it's people on both extremes who are more fragile and more impacted by these sort of things. And I worry about the potential impact it could have on people like that. And just, I mean, I could see where it could devastate somebody to have to go through that. But I don't know what the answer is to that.
We're not wired for what you're describing.
Right.
I mean, and I don't want to like go too far off of Star Wars into like just like meta commentaries on human and evolution, but we are not designed for this moment in our history where we are available to people at all times of the day. Mm-hmm. We are on blast all the time. If somebody wants to reach us, whether it is our mom, our brother, our ex, or people on the internet who we've never met in our life, people can find us and get to us almost all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, of course you can unplug, you can go offline, and that is a method for you, but you just can't turn off the constant anxiety today. Right. And it's all just brand new. And we get so upset at each other for the things that go on the internet. And I think forget to take a moment and go, none of us know how to do this. Mm-hmm. We were not raised to do this. Humankind has not done this for thousands of years. We used to have space to think, and now we just don't. Yeah. And so I just remember to be patient with people and just be patient, put my best foot forward, and realize and remember that like we're all trying to communicate on a platform that makes no intuitive sense to anybody. There are people who have gotten good at it and adapted, but I really believe we all are yearning for something different than the way we're communicating to one another, which is why we love podcasts. Right. Because this feels natural.
Right. Yeah, no, and this is, and this is why I was excited to have a conversation with somebody who, if we were to walk into a voting booth, we'd probably vote differently, but this is kind of proof that you can start in these two different zones and still have a great conversation. I always call myself an extreme moderate, right? I mean, and I think most people are, right? At the end of the day,
most people are, yeah.
You're not, but because of, and I think a lot of it has to do with this social media world and this heavily marketed world, is you have to pick a side. And unfortunately, the fringe edges have taken ownership of the middle. And so you can't associate with a side without being instantly associated, which causes these
The Last Jedi, DJ, live free, don't enlist, brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
what does he say to Finn? It's all a game. You kill them today, they kill you tomorrow. The First Order, the Empire, the Resistance, it's all the same, brother. Live free, do not enlist. It is part of my mantra, and I was so glad when DJ handed that to us as dialogue in that movie. It's one of my faves.
Yeah, it's true, man. It really is. Well, let's talk about your Star Wars experience and your Star Wars growing up, because I mean, look, we're not going to fix it today, as much as we'd love to make it.
Well, the book comes out in October, and that's when you're going to fix it.
You're making a promise on the cover of that book, Steven, that says the Force can fix the world.
I originally titled it "How the Force Can Fix America," but the publisher was like, "Let's think bigger. What about the world?" Well, okay. I think we might be overselling here.
If you insist, I'll do my best. But so tell me about your first experiences with Star Wars. When did you discover it, and how did it impact you?
Yeah, so I know that I discovered Star Wars through the special edition box, cassette with the gold wrapping in the 90s, 1996. I know that's when I first experienced Star Wars because I was a fan by the time the 2000s rolled around, but I don't remember watching them. I don't remember much of the 90s and being that young. My first Star Wars memories are playing with toys. I had my Luke Skywalker Return of the Jedi toy in all black with the cloak. And I had the spy from episode 4, who follows Han Solo and Luke into the port and rats them out to the Empire. You know, the long snout.
Garandin or Garandan? Yeah. Oh, that's a great impression. That's
I had those 2 toys, and also a Luke Skywalker with red, like maroon armor. I think this is like an extended universe sort of deal, or expanded universe sort of deal.
I think that was part of the Shadows of the Empire set.
Yes, Shadows of the Empire Luke. These were my favorites. I adored these 3 toys, and I have rich memories of playing with them on the dirt hill outside of my childhood home with my younger brother, playing King of the Hill, knocking toys down to the bottom of the hill, and whoever's toy got knocked down, you had to go get it. And that for me is like where Star Wars starts, is playing with my brother and bonding over these toys and these characters and making stories for them. So that's for me the foundation. And then I was radicalized by the prequels, and I actually have specific movie going memories of those movies, but not the originals.
So would you consider yourself a prequel kid as a result, or?
I sure am. Yeah. I was born in 1989. And so my first Star Wars movie in theaters was The Phantom Menace. And I can't say that I remember going. I just don't have a very good memory. For me, the formative Star Wars memory, when Star Wars became mine and it became like a huge part of my identity, was at age 15, seeing Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3, in theaters without parents, with my best friend, my brother, and 2 other kids from school. We left school early that day to get in line, because this was the day where you still had midnight showings, and if you wanted to get a good seat, you needed to be there at 6 p.m. So we left school early. We went home. We got our handmade Jedi robes that we had been building for the past year, which I will send you some pictures. They are gorgeous. And we left school early and went to the theater, and we got a spot on the sidewalk, and we stayed there until midnight again. And I miss midnight showings. I wish they would go back to having them actually be a thing, because I made friends on that sidewalk. That night, waiting for that movie, I made friends with strangers. I did lightsaber training with like some other guy on the sidewalk who was like a really great swordsman, and he taught us all moves. And I just remember being enriched by that anticipation so much, molded and defined by it. So Episode 3, that for me is like the canonical moment where I became a deep Star Wars fan, and it became part of who I am today.
Did you continue to follow the what has become the Legends stories? Did you read the books, or did you sort of
video games?
Video games
so,
kept you going.
Yeah. So for me, Legends is video games. Jedi Academy series with Kyle Katarn, Rosh, and Desan, I believe, was the bad guy in the Jedi Academy games, kind of a lizard creature, and the Knights of the Old Republic. So those for me were the incredibly addictive Star Wars games that, for that time in my fandom, really defined my Star Wars stories that I told when I was writing fan fiction with my buddies. We wrote like Old Republic fanfics, and we would share them with each other. We would redline them and edit them for each other, and then publish them online on blogs. I have a book. It's like this big from when I was 17 years old, called The Valley of the Sith. And it's just my Microsoft Word super long screed about like the origins of Revan, Darth Revan. But I think after that, the only other thing I would mention for extended universe stuff, Legends, Star Wars Galaxies. Are you familiar with that game?
Oh yeah, I played that for many hours. Yep.
That's my heart.
Yeah.
That game is my heart. I again, like, made friends on that game, like real world friends I made online playing Galaxies. And I struggle to describe the elation I feel when I remember my character, Octora Reams, rogue Imperial cadet with an attitude, purchasing a property on Naboo in the hillsides beneath where the Emperor's mansion was situated. I think outside of the city of Moynia, I believe it was. I'm gonna botch which spaceport it was, but I believe it was outside the city of Moynia. And getting on my speeder at the spaceport, driving out into the countryside of Naboo, through the swamps, through the forests, and to the mountains, and getting to my home, and walking my character into my home on Naboo, and I would sit. I would have my characters sit down because I just really took role playing very seriously.
Yeah. And
I just want to be there. I just want to be there all the time. I loved that game.
That was it sounds like you went to that you used that game the way they designed it, and I did it as well for a while. I was a bit older than you, but I didn't have all the time to do it. But yes, you could definitely just suck yourself in and essentially take a job and live in that Star Wars galaxy.
My best friend got married on the game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So my best friend, his name's Will, and this was so fun because I'd go to his house and he had two computers because he was a big computer gamer. We'd play side by side. He was like 16 years old, and he was starting to talk to this girl online through the game, and her character was called Distarani, an Imperial, and his character was Kodiak, a rebel, and they had a role-playing relationship where they were both supposed to be loyal to their side, but they had a romantic relationship on the side. So basically the Lost Stars story, which has now been canonized in the novels. So they basically had that story going on in their role-playing. And eventually they started talking and texting and all that stuff. And eventually Will hopped on a plane to go out to Idaho to go see the girl.
Oh, wow.
and met her. And they ended up getting married. They were married for 15 years. And went to that wedding, and it was Star Wars themed, and it was all because of Star Wars Galaxies. We're just role-playing the Imperial Rebel romance led to a real life thing. It's so cool.
And that's, I think that's sort of a recurring theme in this conversation and in general, as I have conversations through this podcast, is there's something about Star Wars that when you make that connection, when you see somebody wearing a Star Wars t-shirt, or they make a reference that only a Star Wars fan would know, there's an instant connection. And, sometimes it leads to marriage, which is a little more unlikely, but it certainly does lead to conversation and sort of that sort of tip of the hat. And you kind of recognize each other, and yet we have this challenge of continuing that conversation. I sent you a note earlier today. I had posted a poll on Twitter asking people, Star Wars at its core is a story of hope, family, politics, and I can't remember what the fourth one was, but it's somewhere here. Either way, hope came up over 50% of the time in that survey, and that's, I think, what kind of is the most frustrating, and to kind of bring up
choices. That was the
choices was the fourth one. Yeah. And which I think is sort of the ultimate underlying thing of most stories, but it does come back to hope, and that, I think, is maybe that's why the Star Wars discourse is so jarring, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a story, regardless of what side of the real world you live in, and whether you're rich or poor or left or right or whatever, there is that hope that things can be better. And yet the conversation so often turns into "you're wrong, I'm right," and that's a very strange disconnect.
Yeah, it is a disconnect. One of the chapters of my book that I'm most proud of is the chapter on the virtue of hope. And again, my cards on the table. I'm a more right of center person. Hope is not a dirty word, but for some reason, I think we tend to treat it like it is because it was Obama's thing for, for 4 years on running for president. I don't think it was the theme of his second campaign for re-election, but it was the first one. Hope and change, and hope is a beautiful thing. It's like what gets us up in the morning, whether it is like a motivation to change the world, or it's just your belief that today is going to be better than yesterday. And hope in Star Wars is just everywhere. It's the reason that we've got rebellions are built on hope. It's the reason that Leia, holds the Death Star plans in her hand. And the rebel cadet asks her, what do we have? What do we just like fight Darth Vader for? Like, what do you have? And she just says, hope. And it's so beautiful to me because hope is this double-ended dagger, right? Like it can cut you, because the Death Star plans were a death sentence. To have those Death Star plans put a mark on Leia and the rebellion for death. It was the most dangerous thing that they had ever done, but it was the closest they had ever come to seeing a future in which they could be free from fear, free from tyranny, free to live their lives as they see fit without being blown apart by the Empire. It was their first chance in a long time of seeing that future. And I just see a world where we have so little hope. And again, going back to the polarization of our political discourse, two things happened this year, and I talk about them both in my chapter on hope. Cities across America burned in summer of 2020 for a combination of what I would call pent-up anger about the pandemic and just people being restless, also mixed with racial justice protests and a lot of anger over policing and justice in this country. And this spilled over immediately into, like we want things to be different. We want things to change to things are on fire. Later in January of 2021, you have Donald Trump lose the election. You have his supporters very upset. They think that the country is now going to be handed over to socialists and become a banana republic because that is what the people who they follow have told them is going to happen. And Donald Trump pushes his supporters into believing that there's actually a way to fix this election, like that it's not over. That all that we need to do is pressure the right people and the electoral ballots will not be counted. Let's march on the Capitol and put pressure on them so that, they will honor the will of the people, knowing that this is not going to happen. And what do you think happens? It boils over into a riot. It boils over. And I say a riot because I think insurrection is, even though I've called it that, I think it's a too motivated of a word to describe what that was. An insurrection is like a very motivated thing. And all I saw was despair.
Right.
Oh, did I lose you?
Nope,
Okay,
I'm still here. Sorry.
Yeah. And what I saw in that was despair. Like the world is ending. If we don't do this now, it's over. And that's sad. Like that makes me hurt for people that like they would think that like that things are that awful that they have to go commit a federal crime. Federal crime for a guy who lost an election fair and square. Like the indictments and the felony charges are just starting this week to start getting rolled out against these people, and they deserve it. But that doesn't mean I don't feel bad for them. These are people with like a lot of them like have nothing. A lot of them are people with nothing, and they did it for a guy who has everything,
right? And
he doesn't care. And that just makes me sad. And I write about this in the book in the context of Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera and the choice of who you're going to fight for when it comes to taking down evil, standing up against tyranny. There's a choice that we all have between choosing politics based in hope, reform, gradual change, making things better, or there's the politics of vengeance, burning things down, and everybody's bad. So we need to just make sure that, everybody is taken out. And like Saw Gerrera to me is the embodiment of that kind of politics. Mm-hmm. Unbridled, unfocused anger, resentment, rage, and not a willingness to build anything. You would not want Saw Gerrera handling any of the post-war trials and reconciliation events between the Empire and the rest of the galaxy. It would be firing squads. He's not a guy who can build things. Mon Mothma is.
Right.
And so I write about those two events, and then I put it against what Saw Gerrera stands for and what Mon Mothma stands for, and make my case for a politics based in hope, whether or not you're liberal, conservative, libertarian, socialist, whatever. Yeah.
No, and I think it's and not to overstate, but I think the fact that conversations can be had, and I think that's what's missing, and I think that's what's lost, is that ability to actually have a conversation. Like people who let me shift it to the sequels a little bit, because I think that's where the political the any political input on the conversation about Star Wars really ramped up during The Last Jedi. And there were online, there was online discourse. There was people bullied off the internet. There were people who were wrongly or inappropriately accused of bullying people off the internet. There was both sides. There was a lot going on. And what it did was it created this, you either love the sequels or you didn't. And then of course, so my own personal opinion on the sequels, I'll tell you where I sit. And this is how I know I'm an extreme moderate, because I love The Force Awakens. I thought The Force Awakens was just a fun return to Star Wars. Really well done from that perspective. The Last Jedi, I think, is an excellent story. It's one of my favorite Star Wars stories, but it's not a movie that I watch a lot, because it's an exhausting movie, and it is what it is.
So far, we're the same. Yeah.
Rise of Skywalker I was more disappointed walking out of that than I was of walking out of The Phantom Menace the first time. Now I've come around. I'm a big Phantom Menace and prequels fan, but Rise of Skywalker still sort of left me unfulfilled. And yet now you have people all over the place on this.
Yeah, we have the same view of the sequel trilogy, movie for movie. My opinions on each one of those are basically the same. So I won't spend too much time kind of unloading my negativity on The Rise of Skywalker or what exhausted me about The Last Jedi. So much to say it was beautiful. What I find to be telling about this conversation is that there seems to be an expectation that whichever movie you liked says something about your political views.
I have that in my notes here. I wanted this. That's amazing. Yes.
It's crystal clear. Everybody reacts this way, where if you stan The Last Jedi, you're standing it because you're defending the side of the online discourse that's coming to the defense of like Kelly Marie Tran, and because you love Admiral Holdo and you're glad that she smacked around Poe Dameron, and that you don't care about Luke Skywalker, like, rather than just like, well, actually, I just kind of have cinematic opinions about this movie. It was too long. It was kind of boring at times. It's supposed to say something about you, because you have to like follow the online discourse, and then your opinion follows after it. I've just been stunned at the amount of people who went from being soft on The Last Jedi to being rabid defenders of it, because defending The Last Jedi meant defending a certain way of seeing the world, because it became a pissing match between traditionalists who think that Luke is the be all end all of Star Wars and people who are okay with kind of changing of the guard, which is that's what politics is all based about, is whether or not you have a predisposition to honor tradition or to throw traditions out windows.
Which is why I think the Luke Skywalker, the not my Luke Skywalker perspective became a political story, right? Or a political
100%, 100%.
Because it was right. That was my guy. What is he doing? And at to me, and that's why I love it as a story. It's a great evolution of a story. I understand people who wanted to see Luke out there with the green lightsaber slashing down stormtroopers and just running through the First Order. I get
so did Rey. She wanted to see that too, but she didn't get it.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I always say the irony of people who have that concern about the Last Jedi is that they're missing the point that that's actually what that's about. That movie is about you who didn't get what you expected your hero to be. And again, cool movie concept, hard for some people to, it's a great story. It's a different way to tell a Star Wars story.
It's part of why I'm a libertarian. I'm not predisposed to treat things as sacred. I have a certain set of things that I believe very strongly in, but I don't believe in making things out on this world sacrosanct. And I'm okay with disrupting of traditions. And that's kind of why I am the way I am politically. And there's this thing that goes on with Luke, and you pointed out, like, not my Luke Skywalker. Yeah, I know it's not your Luke Skywalker. Your Luke Skywalker is the same Luke Skywalker as the little broom boy. The little broom boy is playing with an action figure of his hero. I have the same action figures here in my house, and they mean something to me. But I'm also 32 now, and I've seen and experienced like decay of people who you look up to, and people not being the all-powerful hero who can slay any dragon that you think they are. And that's not to say that Luke wasn't that. He ends up getting back on his feet. He has a moment of identity crisis, several years of identity crisis. I think it's like wrong to rob a character of a reality check. Like Luke being down and out for a period of his life. What kind of person doesn't go down and out at some point? What matters is whether or not you get up. And he got up, and he gave his life for the other leading characters, for the Resistance, to stop evil and to slow down Kylo Ren. Like, he did the thing again. He helped again to slay the dragon. And this time the dragon was in him. It wasn't Darth Vader, and it wasn't the Emperor. He had to do something within himself, which was like fight self-loathing and disappointment and not seeing himself as the hero anymore. That's real. And I know people don't want Star Wars to be all real life, but that's why you loved it in the first place. Because Darth Vader could be anything that you were afraid of. It could be any boogeyman that you had. It could be the bully at school, or it could have been your dad. Or George Lucas, Darth Vader was like his dad. Star Wars is always connected to things in our lives that are real. And I just don't get I don't get why like the Last Jedi thing and Luke Skywalker being down and out and then getting back on his feet offends people. But I think it's like part of a mishmash of things. It's that plus other things that are going on in the movie.
Yeah, and I think that's, there was a couple of weeks ago I had Peter Townley on the show, and he was the original host of the Star Wars show, the YouTube show. And he made a comment that, it's a common political ploy to say things were better where they used to be. And, things, let's get back to the good old days when Luke was swinging the green lightsaber and kicking Boba Fett into a Sarlacc pit. Actually, it was Han. I know. Don't at me, bro. But, and I think that's part of where the connection to a political stance comes. And this is where, I've had, as I was mentioning before, I've had DM conversations with some pretty extreme different point of views than mine, and I just have to remind them, and maybe you can respond to this perspective that I try to bring to people. It doesn't work, by the way, but I try to bring this perspective that it's a movie, it's a film, it's a story we love. That is for sure. But if it doesn't go, as Luke said in The Last Jedi, this isn't going to go the way you expect. And if it doesn't, it's not a condemnation of you. Or even your original story that you loved. It's an evolution of that story. And sometimes stories go in directions that you don't like or that you don't expect or that you don't want them to go. But that's also a little bit like life, right? We all had our plan for where we would be. And some of us are there and some of us are on our way there or in some place completely different. And so there's that lack of comfort, perhaps.
I think people are incredibly untethered from purpose and meaning in their lives in the year of our Lord 2021. I think we see it in suicide rates. We see it in drug addiction and drug abuse. We see it in rising depression and forms of anxiety among young people. People are feeling at this point in time anchorless and rudderless. And it is nothing if not natural for them to cling on to things from their life that gave them something that felt solid as rock. And Star Wars is solid as rock. The thing that I struggle with in trying to blend kind of understanding this really uncomfortable time that we're at civilizationally with that need is that we still need to like own up to the fact that Star Wars came to us when we were children. And it's not that it is for children, but it is kept alive by children. And nothing gives people, in my humble opinion, more meaning, purpose, drive, sense of self and security than having children. They see the world in a new way. New parents, when people look into the eyes of their kid, something changes. My daughter's 10. It's revelatory, and it's the same people. And I'm going to try to connect the dots here. It's the same people in my life, social conservatives in particular, like there's like this wave of like traditional conservatives who are like getting into Catholicism for the first time in their life. Radical on Twitter about Catholic doctrine and screaming at the top of their lungs about returning to the good old days. Fertility rates are low. Why are people not getting married and having kids? We need to get rid of like apartment dwellings in cities and prioritize just the building of single family homes because nobody's having families. None of these people have children. None of these people screaming about this on the internet in my political circles have families. They are young men who feel like the world is like leaving them behind, moving on without them, and they have a sense of the way things are supposed to be, but they're not doing it themselves. And the Star Wars thing for me kind of goes back to just like, if you are not sharing this story with Padawans and you think that this is all about you, you're not going to be happy. You're going to be miserable. Because Star Wars is going to start looking stale. It's going to start looking tired. It's not going to be the same as it was because you can't look at it through that lens of when you were a child anymore because you're an adult. You have problems. You have addictions. You have debt. You have things on your mind. Star Wars is just not going to be there for you like it was. But when it's there for your kid, you relive it. And I hope I'm not yelling. I'm getting loud on my microphone. You relive it through your children. And it could be your nieces or nephews, or it could be like the kids next door who like loved a lightsaber fight. And maybe you like go out and hang out with them and talk about Star Wars with them. But like, I really believe it's a story of generational change. And it's incumbent on fans to remember that this is not about you anymore at some point. But that, that's not to say they don't have a right to criticize things. have at
Sure.
it, you know?
Yeah, and I think that, and there's your perspective on that is really interesting, and I really like what you're saying there, and and perhaps part of the challenge is having that conversation with people without it. There's as I listened to it and really I was locked into it. There's two things that I think people say inadvertently. One is, well, Star Wars has moved on past you. Move on. I've caught myself saying that, and that's not a fair assessment, right? Star Wars has evolved, but you didn't. But to your point, it was a different. The story has they've lost sight of perhaps where the story.
It's a divisive way to say it to somebody, like, you know, like, it's not about you, like, move on. You don't want to do that. You just gotta be like, remember like Yoda, like, share what you have learned, pass on what you have learned.
Right.
You know, that's what this is for.
Right. Exactly. And the second, I loved what you just said about it's not a story for children, but it lives on through children. Because I think to hear that phrase is really important, because it becomes sort of an untenable argument. If I was to tell and again, I've caught myself in those conversations saying it's a story for kids. Well, if it was, 51-year-old me wouldn't be watching everything that comes out and waiting and talking about it all the time. It's because it brings me to that subconscious mindset where I can escape and I can be in that world. And then I can enjoy it with a 32-year-old and a 70-year-old and my 8-year-old son. And we can all have, I mean, think about that. Star Wars is the only thing, I think, that's a kind of a blanket statement, but it's one of the most powerful things that 4 people from 4 different generations with 4 different political views, if we leave those things at the door, we can have so much fun together. And I think that's what it's really all about.
Yeah, I'm currently in a flame war on one of my YouTube channels right now with a lot of commenters who are mad at me for doing a video on what I view as the politics of Loki, the new Disney Plus series. And they're mad at me for exactly what you said, because you described like Star Wars as like a moment to like sit down and escape. And there comes like the escapism word. Like, you've got a life full of troubles, stresses, and worries. Star Wars is a different place, and it does take you out of it. And I understand when people are like upset about me for doing like the Beltway Banthas podcast or doing this video that I did on Loki, which you can check out on my channel called Rightly on YouTube. That they like that I'm like trampling on something that is, again, sacred to them, an escape for them, and it means something to them that I'm saying that it's not. And I get why that bothers people, but the thing that I just keep coming back to, and I just believe very strongly in, is if you love Star Wars, you listen to it. If you love Star Wars and it means something to you, there are ways in which it's quotes and it's rhythms, like they are in you all the time. You know, when your kid is, I don't know, like learning how to catch a ball or something, and they're starting to get discouraged, and they're like, well, I'm going to try, Dad. And then my daughter will do this, like, I'm going to try my best. And I would just be like, do or do not. There is no try. Like, you can do it. You're like pushing the kid through this quote. You believe that, like, if you commit, if you say, I'm going to do this thing, you're going to have a better chance. I live Star Wars. Its quotes and its ideas are part of the way that I see the world. And so, like, that's why I wrote this book, How the Force Can Fix the World, because Star Wars doesn't have to be talked about as a political text. There's a book out there called, oh shoot, I just had it and it just left me. The World According to Star Wars. It's by a liberal lawyer, Cass Sunstein. He worked in the Obama administration. And he did this book looking at the Star Wars story and then basically pulling out of it cases for progressive policy. And nobody got mad at that because his natural base really likes that kind of stuff. My book plays with the politics of Star Wars in a different way. which is to say there is no compelling message in Star Wars about whether or not we have a living constitution or an originalist constitution that cannot change. But Star Wars does have a message about change, and it does have a message about things like choice and free will. And so we need to talk about what Star Wars says about free will. The Bad Batch is all about free will. Mm-hmm. The Bad Batch show is all about choice and whether or not we really even have choices in our life. If you're a clone who had an inhibitor chip put in your head, that's kind of what Loki is about. Whether or not you have free choice and free will when you have like a time governing authority who control the timelines. And you can talk about why that matters. And you don't have to talk about the political implications up front, but they are there in the background. And so I spend like an entire chapter unpacking Star Wars and what it says about free will and whether or not we have it. And then I make a conclusion at the end about like, if you believe Star Wars says this, and if you believe Star Wars might be right, like that, life is complicated. Sometimes we don't have all the choices we think we have. If you believe Star Wars is right, here is how I think you should apply that to your real life. Mm-hmm. Because what good's going to church if you don't go out and share the word of God and live it, right? Like Star Wars is kind of a religion to some people. And I live it. I try to live it. I think Star Wars is right about the world. And so I just took that, tried to make it into a book and say like, hey, here's the list of suggestions. If you want to live more Star Wars, here's how to do it.
That's great. And that comes out in October and it's available. Is it available for pre-order now? It is, right?
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah, it's available for pre-order. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble's, IndieBound, and anywhere else you pre-order books. Comes out October 26th, right before Halloween. Should be fun.
Excellent. Well, I will also make sure that there's a link to it in the notes below. Stephen, this has been a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed coming into a conversation knowing that while I would say we're probably closer aligned on many things than many people would like to. I think that's the problem is people have difficulty sort of admitting where the Venn diagram actually is. And that because we're not programmed that way anymore. But
yeah,
Stephen, this has been a really fun conversation and I appreciate it. Where can people find you online?
Yeah. So best place to touch base with me, excuse me, is on Twitter, Stephen_Kent89. That's Stephen with a PH _Kent89. And you can also find me on Substack. I have a newsletter called Politicize Me. And you can go over to politicizeme.substack.com for some of my thoughts on politics, pop culture, and the good life. So how to live well using some of the stuff that we love and that we watch on TV and on the silver screen. And then you can subscribe to that. It'll tell you all about my book and the newsletter. And I would love to talk, and people can email me or shoot me a tweet anytime, and I'm happy to talk about any of these things.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you for the conversation. This was thorough, like well-rounded. And I just really appreciate your open mind and heart on tackling some of these tough subjects.
Awesome. Thank you. So before I let you go, if I could get you to give me a little bumper of this is Stephen Kent and you're listening to Around the Galaxy, that'd be great.
All right. This is Stephen Kent and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Perfect. Thanks. Hang on one second. I'm just going to end this broadcast and